Well, welcome to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Big Tom Perkins, along with Dr. Cameron Meyerly. And today, again, we're joined by Dr. Andrew Weaver. And I think we're going to continue our discussion here on our parasite resistance, our EBVs, the fecal egg counts. Is that correct there, Cam?
Yeah, it is. We kind of left things in a good place last time, but the amount of selection pressure that I think all of us are placing individually on this trait lends itself to a second episode just to kind of talk about heritability and selection opportunity with the EBV. And certainly, when we're thinking about heritability, Andrew, do you want to explain a little bit why we're concerned about that and what that means for the amount of genetic change we can impact in a period of time?
Yeah. So when we think about heritability, and we may have touched on this on a previous episode, but just as a quick update reminder, the heritability simply represents the portion of a trait, the observable portion of a trait that's controlled by genetics. And so, like if you have a trait that's 10% heritable, that means 10% of what you observe in that trait is controlled by genetics. You could have maybe a trait that's 90% heritable, 90% of what's observed in that trait is genetic. The remainder would be environmental factors, management factors, and things like that. For most of our breeding values, for most of our traits, I should say, that number is less than 50. Most are between 10 and about 30, 40 range. So the vast majority of what we observe in our traits is actually environmental. But that in genetic component is very important because remember, that's what we can select on. That's what we can improve generation to generation. That's what we can, pass from farm to farm through RAM purchasing decisions and things like that. And so for fecal egg count, that number is about 20 to 25%. So not quite a quarter of what we observe in fecal egg count is controlled by genetics. So it'd be very similar to growth traits. So where we see, we can select animals that grow faster, we get more animals that grow faster. Similar opportunities exist for parasite resistance through selection for fecal egg count. So there's opportunity there for sure, which is encouraging. And going into that, think about genetic progress in general. It takes some genetic variability to be present, so you can actually select individuals that are on one extreme or another to move the population in the direction you're looking to move them in. And we have that for parasite resistance. We have individuals, we talked about this on the last episode, we have individuals that have very low fecal egg counts. We have other individuals that have very high fecal egg counts. And so you can find those that have those lower counts, that have more parasite resistance. We know there's genetic component to that. And so we can breed those individuals and get more parasite resistance in future generations.
Yeah, and so we've talked a lot about Katahdin sheep, and if we're talking about fecal egg count EBVs, certainly the Katahdin breed is one that comes to mind pretty quickly. We tend to talk about it a lot, and we're certainly selecting for it, regardless of where we're at across the country. Is this EBV something that other breeds could take advantage of and maybe offer some opportunity for those breeds that are doing other things very, very well? Another avenue of selection.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know we talk a lot about fecal egg counts and parasite resistance as they relate to Katahdins. A lot of Katahdin breeders have been very aggressive in selecting for parasite resistance. It's something that the breed is known for, and one that certainly we can have some confidence in going and finding parasite resistant individuals within that breed. They have quite a bit of data backing up that fact, and so that is a positive for the Katahdins. But we think about other breeds as well, and it's popping up on other people's radar. We think about what the polypays have done over the last few years. Lots of polypay fecal egg count data has gone into the system, and those folks are really starting to pay attention to this trait as well, and put selection pressure on it. So that's really encouraging. And I've talked to a polypay breeder a couple weeks ago and they're getting, pretty extreme on the low side now for fecal egg count. So that'd be pretty neat to be able to find, another breed where you can get, very good parasite resistance, in a breed that may be a little bit more popular in more of the Midwest regions of the country. And certainly a breed that's known for prolificacy and mothering ability and things like that as well.
Yeah, and the other thing, I kind of bring it back to our episode following EAPK, and we kind of gave a rundown of Dr. Bowdrich's immunology talk and the poultry example that he had used, where within the poultry industry, they were selecting those birds for immunological fitness, and also selecting them for growth, and selecting those birds for immune function didn't impact, or there was still selection opportunity on growth. And I think that's something we have to remember, regardless of breed. On the sheep side of things, we can select for immune function or parasite resistance in this case, without directly impacting a lot of our other traits, and select for those other traits at the same exact time. And so, in those other breeds, like, is there value, if I'm a Suffolk producer, is there value in finding more resistant Suffolk sheep, or is the most resistant Suffolk sheep still parasite susceptible? It's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question.
Yep.
I think we need to preface it with the fact that we oftentimes see more variability within a single breed than we do between breeds, and we've stated that before. And so there's selection opportunities, available. And so we think about, Suffolk, a breed that is, we like to stereotype as very parasite susceptible. Well, there's Suffolk sheep out there that are more susceptible than others. Now, you're going to your question on, can we select a Suffolk sheep that is, truly completely parasite resistant as some of our parasite resistant breeds? I don't know if we've gotten to that point. I don't know if we have the data to prove that, to show that. I don't know if we've selected for it hard enough and long enough to get to that point. Could it be possible over time? Maybe. I don't really know. I think it's something that if Suffolk breeders determine that it's a trait that's valuable to them, that they need to have in their sheep to remain productive, then start selecting for it. Start measuring it. Start doing fecal egg counts. Utilize the fecal egg count breeding value, and utilize that in your selection decisions, and start breeding those animals that are going to have lower counts. And with time, hopefully we'd see a decrease in fecal egg counts and an improvement in parasite resistance, even in a breed that is relatively susceptible. How fast that will go, how long it will take, I really don't know how long until we get, until that breed would be able to get to a point where they'd have, a high level of resistance. I don't think there's only a handful of Suffolk breeders out there doing fecal egg counts. And so the population size is not very large right now. You think about other breeds as well. There's some folks that are doing fecal egg counts on the Dorsets. Personally, we've started here at NC State. We've been doing fecal egg counts on our Dorsets for the last 3 years. And we have sheep that are getting into that -40, -50 range on fecal egg count EBV. So, we still have a ways to go. But hopefully we're starting to identify some of those Dorset sheep that may have some more resistant genetics. And so there's other breeds out there as well that are starting to do some with the fecal egg counts. I know we've heard Jake Thorne speak. He's been sharing a lot of his data on the Dorpers as well as the Rambouillets, and some pretty interesting stuff coming out of Texas A&M related to utilizing fecal egg count EBVs and some more of our Western type breeds, the Dorpers down in Texas and the Rambouillets out west. And they're seeing the same things we're seeing with the Katahdins. You can select for it, you can breed for it, you can get lower fecal egg counts as a result, you can improve parasite resistance. And the trend is holding true across breeds. So that's encouraging. I really think that, if we're going to make progress We just need the breeders really need to buy into it. And you all listening, if this is a trait that's of importance to you, and if you're not measuring it already, start collecting some fecal samples, running those fecal egg counts, submitting that data, and using the fecal egg count breeding value in your selection decisions to improve parasite resistance.
Yeah, and you're talking about breeds that are trending in the right direction to being more parasite resistant. And certainly, I will add to your last point, those listening, even if you don't want to go through the effort of collecting the fecals and submitting data, identify breeders that are doing that, and then invest those dollars into sheep. If you want parasite resistance, that's the beauty of EBVs, is we have a gradient of EBV profile to select from and through. And it kind of leads perfectly into my next question, and that was, how do we quantify the economic impact of a negative fecal egg count EBV? And that's another tough one. We're pulling the punches here this morning. But do you have any thoughts, Tom, Andrew, either of you, any thoughts on, we know this is a good thing, but what's the dollar amount, or is there a dollar amount that we can quantify associated with it?
Well, I would think there would be, just in the fact that, those ewes that are highly parasite resistant, you're not putting wormer into them. And they're just overall healthier sheep. Sheep that carry a massive worm load, just don't do well and have a tendency to lay down and die if you're not, keeping up with them constantly. So I don't know how you would figure out necessarily that dollar amount, but it sure adds up.
Yeah, it's a loaded question. It's not like a growth trait's really easy to assign a dollar value to. Even some of our prolificacy traits, you can start thinking about, increase the number of lambs you might have born, what those lambs are worth. Those are pretty easy to assign an economic value to. Fecal egg count's a lot harder. What's 1,000 eggs per gram worth versus, 5,000 eggs per gram. And so it is a lot more challenging. But I really think the value in it is, you can't sell a dead sheep. And so if you can breed for parasite resistance and keep them alive, those sheep are worth a lot more money than the ones that die.
Yep.
Now, can we assign a death loss percentage relative to fecal egg count breeding value? I don't think so. We're not at that point yet. Certainly, some of Dr. Bowdridge's work, it's intriguing, and I think we're maybe talk about that on a future episode. But there are some, death loss differences relative to high and low fecal egg count breeding values. And so, that's something to consider, but it certainly is a lot harder to put a exact dollar value on that fecal egg count EBV. But just think about, can I make them more resistant? And if I make them resistant, am I going to keep more alive? Am I going to decrease, the number of times I need to deworm, the labor associated with that, the cost of the dewormer, et cetera. And certainly there's value there. It's just a lot harder to quantify.
Right. And I would agree with both those points, to the dead sheep comment, and also just a long-term sustainability of the ewe flock. It's something where that treatment takes time, takes labor, it's costly. And on top of that, that lamb crop, quantifying that death loss and the difference in relation to what that high sire, low sire offspring would be, is near impossible. And it's something that, for the sake of measuring and reporting on a producer's flock, on a personal level, it's not worth it. I don't want to be hauling out an extra 20% of dead lambs because I used a high sire to show that my low sires are improved. But yeah, no, those were great answers. And certainly I also think too, and play devil's advocate on this, is not dying enough. So yes, we can't sell a dead sheep, but do we stop selecting at that don't die threshold?
I think that's up for the breeder to determine. Depending where you're at in the country, I know there's folks are going to place a different level of emphasis on parasite resistance, and maybe they get to a point where the sheep aren't dying, and to them it's more valuable to select for maybe prolificacy or growth or carcass traits or something else. And so that's what they're going to do, and that's their decision to make. And so it probably varies by region. I do think that some of Dr. Bowdridge's work is interesting as you get to those extremely low fecal egg count EBVs and some of the impact that it might have on the immune system. Maybe there is value to, going to the extreme on a trait like that for some of those other benefits that we're just now kind of realizing. But it's probably up to the breeder to decide, in my opinion.
Yeah, and my point is, do all negative 99s look like St. Croix? And do they perform like St. Croix out in, nothing against St. Croix, but
yeah, 5 years ago I may have agreed with you there.
Okay.
I think there are sheep out there that are extremely low that are starting to have a little bit more shape and body and substance to them, maybe have some value in terms of growth and some other traits as well. Early on when I started working with Katahdins in graduate school, it seemed like every super low fecal egg count sheep we worked with was, all white and about as thin as a piece of paper and pretty frail made. But it seems like the breeders have recognized that that's a problem and have identified those that are low fecal egg count, but still have, some other productive traits about them, and have selected in that direction. And I think we have some sheep now available within the Katahdin breed that have low fecal egg counts and still offer a lot of value in terms of other productive traits as well. I think we're seeing the opportunity to select for multiple things at the same time, and that progress be made. So I don't know, what are your thoughts on it, Tom or Cam, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a testament to that multi-trait selection. And that was kind of the whole point of that line of questioning, was to say, I think we can get a bad reputation for those parasite resistant sheep because for so long they did look a certain way, that it's just this assumed phenotype of what you're getting with that parasite resistance coming into the equation. But certainly, yeah, I would definitely agree that not just phenotype improvement, but we are finding sheep that have a pretty decent hair index. On the Katahdin side of things, maternal traits are improved as well as our growth traits. It's a little bit easier to find a more complete EBV profile, not necessarily balanced, but improved in more than just one trait. But yeah, and Tom, just personal experience, I know you've put some emphasis on incorporating sheep with fecal egg count EBVs, while also pulling in some other improved traits on your EBV profile. Would you like to share on that note?
It's just something we've been kind of paying attention to since we started into NSIP, using the NSIP rams. As I first started looking at NSIP rams that were really high or low in fecal egg count, and those minus 80s and minus 90s, there wasn't much there as far as post weaning weights, and got kind of lucky and found a ram that had moderate post weaning weights, and so we didn't really end up going down that avenue of having the really kind of thin, frail looking ewes that were highly parasite resistant. And as we went on, we just kind of looked for more of those kind of rams. And so I think we got a little lucky in picking for those traits, and when in the beginning when I wasn't really sure what I was looking for, kind of a thing. So you've been out here and you've seen some of these, some of these lambs, and some of these lambs look really good, and they've got some pretty good parasite numbers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that was part of the reason I asked. And certainly I think, in your situation and for both of us, where we're located at geographically, and I think we talked a little bit last episode on maybe we don't need negative 100 or negative 95 fecal egg count type sheep, just because of, the climate that we're raising sheep in. But certainly, as a grass-fed, grass-based producer, it's something where you need to keep as many internal parasites out of those animals to achieve performance on that forage that you're providing to them. So yeah, I mean, it just makes sense, again, in your situation with your management style, that EBV comes along in selection with all of your other traits that you're pulling out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do, like I said, with the way we graze. We're definitely not overgrazing. We're grazing a lot taller, maybe more mature forage than a lot of people would want to do, but we're just doing everything we can to keep those sheep out of that parasite zone while they're grazing, and trying to use these long rest periods to reduce the amount of L3 larvae that would still be there in that forage.
Yeah,
but when you go back to some of what Dr. Bowdridge just talked about, there's a whole lot more reasons to kind of be looking at that trait than just parasite resistance.
Yeah, we need to get him on here because we're hinting at a lot of stuff. People are like, well, what are they talking about? But I will attest, I think, our early selection for at least keeping parasite resistance in check when we were raising commercial sheep, and then now there's a little bit more fine-tuned selection. I will admit that this year especially, our grazing has been, as Tom, you like to put it, rotationally overgrazing, if I got that correct. And I know we are in a parasite-rich environment, and grazing forages past where they need to be, and grazing into that. We're pushing those sheep to a level to clean up some things. And we've talked previously that was my goal, to breed sheep that had the ability to go out and work on pasture and to really improve forages, improve land without dealing with the negative side effects of grazing in a heavier situation or with a shorter rest period. We FOMACHA'd, I think 2 weeks ago, I had one ewe that was at a 4. And that wasn't even a Katahdin. That was one of the Texel ewes. Everything else was a 1 and a 2.
Yeah.
And so it's in body condition scores, we're right around 3, 2.5, 3. And I can't talk highly enough about just keeping that in check. And really, one of the things when we're thinking about EBVs or quantitative genetics and selection principles, I can select for growth all day long as I have a set of scales. The one that grows more in that early period, it's pretty easy to find. Unless we pull out the ones that have that more natural selection or that are just not dying in our operation, that's about our only metric for parasite resistance outside of EBVs. And that's something I know a lot of producers I've worked with that have been raising sheep for 30, 40 years, and they've had the time to go that natural selection route, and those sheep are working in their environment. I don't necessarily want to take 30, 40 years to get to that flock of sheep where I'm not seeing dead ewes or dead lambs all the time due to parasite infection. So it's something certainly to speed up that process and kind of give us a glimpse at something that is essentially invisible, that the enemy that we're dealing with. So certainly,
Yeah.
Andrew, you're down there in North Carolina. Would you argue that from an economic value standpoint or just an operational value standpoint, does that fecal egg count EBV increase as we move further south?
Yeah, that percent dead number
Keeps going up.
Yeah. That I don't have data in front of me to show it, but I would have to imagine that -30, -40 in central Ohio on an average year might get by just fine. Down here it might get by just fine, it might not. And so that's where keeping those sheep alive, having those lower fecal egg counts could be very valuable. But I think there's a lot of sheep that probably survive just fine, but that bad year comes around, the stress sets in, and we know that stress is just gonna exaggerate parasite susceptibility and make those sheep really suffer. And so I think there could be some value to improved parasite resistance and lower fecal egg counts as we get further south. I don't have exact data to tell me what that value is. But in talking with lots of folks over the last few years, I get the question, well, is -60 good enough for me? Well, it might be for you and where you're at in your operation. Maybe you feed a little bit more, provide some supplementation. Another person that doesn't feed as much, that maybe is deeper south, maybe -80 is where they need to be. And again, that's not up for us to really tell you, I guess, as much as you all as breeders need to explore and think about and consider. And benchmarking can be very valuable. So use those rams, look at their fecal egg count breeding values, evaluate their progeny. Do they work? Do they not work? Do they need to be treated? Do they die? And see where you need to be. If you used a bunch of -70s last year and the lambs this year are doing great, well, then maybe that'll work. If you used a bunch of -10s and you're having lots of problems, maybe you need to select something with a bit lower fecal egg counts here for this breeding season. And that's where keeping those records can be very valuable. Look at those breeding values of the rams you've used in the past, evaluate their progeny performance, see how they're doing, see where you need to be, and see if you need to make any adjustments.
Yeah, and that's the difficult thing. And you can say this with any type of selection. The more extreme that we want to select, the greater change we enact in that lamb crop. So I make more progress selecting -95s for parasite resistance than when I select for -50s. And that's from a genetic side of things. Tom, you and I have had this discussion quite a bit. On pedigree data alone, if I'm pulling -50s out to breed, and I've got a bunch of sheep that are at 0, pedigree data tells me I'm only going to get to -25. So we're pulling that sheep, that far towards that negative end of the spectrum. Whereas if I'm using a -95, a -100, I'm up in that -40, 50 on pedigree data alone. That's before I even collect any data. So yeah, like we've been saying, certainly we want to have some other traits in there as opposed to parasite resistance and that fecal egg count EBV. But those extreme number ones, we can create a decent amount of change in a pretty short period of time when we're selecting those high-powered EBVs.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important parts of NSIP. You don't have to be a member of NSIP. You don't have to be going in and collecting all the data. But if you're buying NSIP rams, then you can make that change. It's not something that you have to do flock wide. You can do it through rams, and you look for that data that's important to you, especially in that, talk about parasite resistance. And just like you said, you use those rams that have that extreme low fecal weight count number, and you'll see that change in 1 year. It's crazy how fast it works.
Yeah, I think we need to always remember, these breeding values are telling us relative differences. They're not predicting an exact fecal egg count. They're not predicting an exact level of parasite resistance. Rather, they're telling us, okay, I've got a -50 and I've got a -90. There's a 40% difference there.
Right.
And that difference is really what we should be focused on. I get concerned sometimes when I hear folks, try to predict an exact level of performance given a certain breeding value, because that's not going to be necessarily the case. It's really about differences between individuals, differences between rams and their expected progeny, and that's how they should be interpreted. That's how they were meant to be interpreted.
100%.
Right. And definitely the lamb crop aspect of it. I mean, that's the only reason their estimated breeding values. These are breeding individuals that we are selecting to impact genetics and improve performance in that next generation, and hopefully for generations to come if we're retaining stock out of those rams.
I agree. Well, we're coming up on our time here. You got each of you have something you want to just conclude with there?
Yeah, just wanted to thank Andrew for hopping on here and having these discussions with us. Certainly, we understand that maybe these topics aren't the most fun, but we feel they're important and educational most importantly. And if you have any questions, just the background or the nuance of estimated breeding values, reach out to any of us, and Tom will have contact info there in a minute. But it's something that certainly we've all been where you're at right now, and that place might be just not fully understanding or grasping potential for selection and how maybe NSIP or EBVs fit into your operation. So again, we've all been there. If you need help or just have more questions, reach out. Most definitely.
Oh, I was going to say, I always enjoy joining the conversation with you all. And, obviously I see a lot of value in the fecal egg count breeding value, but I also realize there's, we can't just maybe single trait select. We need to consider the other, economically relevant traits as well. So trying to find that optimal animal that was at optimal, individual with the genetics that we need for our operations is where we need to really place our focus. So, determine, where you're at today, take some records, determine where you're at today, determine where you need to go in the future, and then find those rams that are going to meet those needs and make that genetic change that you're looking for.
Yep. Well, we thank you for listening to another episode of the Grazing Sheep Podcast. We'd love to hear from you. You can do that. You can reach out to me at bigtomperkins@gmail.com. And it was good catching up with you guys and continuing this discussion. So you guys have a good day.
Thanks, Tom. You too.
Thanks, you too.
All righty. Bye.